When you think about the history of Islam in America, what comes to mind? For most of us, the story seems to begin in the 20th century. We might think of the great waves of immigration from the Middle East and South Asia, building mosques in cities like Dearborn and Houston. Or we might think of uniquely American movements like the Nation of Islam, with its powerful and controversial figures like Elijah Muhammad and Malcolm X, who framed Islam as a return to an original black identity, a rejection of the slave master's religion of Christianity. The common, almost unspoken assumption is that Islam is a new religion in the United States, that it is a faith of immigrants, or a 20th century conversion movement fundamentally separate from the nation's founding story, which is overwhelmingly seen as a Protestant Christian narrative. But what if I told you this entire assumption is wrong? What if I told you that Islam was present on American soil before the United States was even a country? What if I told you that hundreds of thousands of one of America's founding populations, the enslaved Africans forced to build the nation, were devout Muslims? Men and women who prayed 5 times a day, who knew the Quran by heart, and who wrote in fluent Arabic, all while in chains. This is the lost, forgotten, and often intentionally erased history of America's first Muslims. It's a story that challenges our neat narratives about what American religion truly is, and it reveals a level of intellectual and spiritual life among the enslaved that was deliberately suppressed for centuries. Today, we are uncovering the evidence for a foundational American faith that predates the Republic itself. America's first Muslims, the forgotten history of enslaved Africans. The evidence, how do we know? For centuries, the dominant narrative of slavery was that the millions of Africans captured and brought to the Americas were heathens or pagans, practitioners of various indigenous tribal religions. This narrative was, of course, essential to the slavers' justification. They were civilizing and Christianizing a godless people. This narrative is not wrong, but it is dangerously incomplete. Historians and Islamic scholars, piecing together shipping manifests, plantation records, and the slaves' own testimonies, now estimate that somewhere between 15% and 30% of all enslaved Africans brought to the Americas were Muslim. Given the 12.5 million Africans in the total transatlantic trade, with about 400,000 coming to the present-day U.S., we are talking about hundreds of thousands of Muslims arriving in chains. How do we know? Because they didn't come from a primitive void. A massive portion of the slave trade, especially in the 18th and early 19th centuries, centered on West Africa, in regions like Senegal, Gambia, Fouta-Djallon, Guinea, and the interior empires of Mali and Songhai. These were not isolated regions. They were the seats of vast, sophisticated Islamic empires, home to world-renowned centers of learning like Timbuktu. Image: ancient Timbuktu Mosque or manuscript. Islam had been the dominant religion of the West African elite and merchant classes for over 500 years before the slave trade even peaked. The people captured were not just farmers. They were merchants, teachers, warriors, and in many cases, highly educated Islamic scholars. And they left us proof. The smoking gun, the Arabic narratives. The most powerful and undeniable evidence we have comes from the pens of the enslaved themselves. These are the autobiographies written in Arabic by enslaved Muslim men in America. These documents are astonishing, laying to rest any myth of a savage or illiterate past. Case 1. Ayuba Suleiman Diallo. Jah ben Solomon. In 1730, a man named Ayuba Suleiman Diallo, a wealthy merchant and scholar from a prominent family in Senegal, was captured and sold into slavery in Maryland. He was put to work in the tobacco fields. Despising the work, he ran away, was captured, and thrown in jail. While in jail, he attracted attention because he would write, in fluent Arabic, on the walls of his cell. His captors, realizing he was not who they assumed, brought in an interpreter. Through this, they discovered his story and his high status. His case became a cause célèbre for English philanthropists. They purchased his freedom, brought him to London in 1733, where he was celebrated in intellectual circles. He helped Sir Hans Sloane, founder of the British Museum, translate Arabic manuscripts, wrote out 3 copies of the Quran from memory, and eventually was able to return to his home in Africa. Ayuba's story proves the presence of a highly educated, aristocratic Muslim elite among the enslaved population. Image: famous 1733 portrait of Ayuba Suleiman Diallo. Case 2. Omar ibn Said. The most famous narrative, the most profound and heartbreaking story is that of Omar ibn Said, born in 1770 in Fouta, Senegal. He was a well-known Islamic scholar and teacher. He was captured in 1807, at the age of 37, and shipped to Charleston, South Carolina. He was sold to a brutal master. He, too, ran away and was jailed in Fayetteville, North Carolina. While in jail, just like Ayuba, he began writing on the walls in Arabic. This shocked the local population. A prominent local, James Owen, was so impressed he purchased Omar, who remained his slave until his death in 1864, just 1 year before the end of the Civil War. In 1831, while still enslaved, Omar ibn Said wrote his autobiography. It is the only known surviving Arabic autobiography written by an enslaved person in the United States. Image. Page from Omar ibn Said's Arabic autobiography. It begins not with a story of his life, but with a plea to God, writing from memory Surah 67 Al-Mulk from the Quran. He writes, "My name is Omar... I am a small man, weak... I cannot write my life. O people of North Carolina, O people of South Carolina... This is a gift to you." While Omar officially converted to Christianity in 1820, his writings are a complex, syncretic blend. He wrote out the Lord's Prayer in Arabic, but also interspersed it with verses from the Quran. His Bible, which still exists, is filled with his handwritten Arabic notes in the margins. His life is a testament to an educated, monotheistic faith that was suppressed, but never fully erased. Suppression, survival, and syncretism. The stories of men like Ayuba and Omar are exceptional only because their literacy was recognized. For the hundreds of thousands of other Muslims who were not scholars, survival of their faith was a near impossibility. The American slave system was a brutal, systematic engine of cultural and religious erasure. 1. Forced conversion. Slaves were, in most cases, forcibly baptized and required to attend Christian services. Practicing Islam openly, the 5 daily prayers Salah, the call to prayer Adhan, fasting for Ramadan was forbidden and would be seen as an act of rebellion. 2. Loss of tools. They were cut off from the core tools of their faith, the Quran, which was an oral and written text, and the community Ummah. They could not gather for Friday prayers Jummah. 3. Loss of name. Their Arabic, Islamic names like Omar, Bilali, Fatima, Aisha were systematically replaced with simple, often classical or biblical, English slave names like Tom, Billy, Sue, severing the link to their identity. 4. Hereditary loss. Because the faith could not be practiced or taught openly, it was almost impossible to pass it on to their children, who were born into this new, Christian-dominated world. Historians and anthropologists now argue that many practices we identify today as quintessentially African American or as part of the Black Church may, in fact, have deep Islamic roots. Call and response. The musical call and response in Black gospel music is, of course, a West African tradition. But it is also the exact form of dhikr, or remembrance, in many West African Sufi communities. Prayer posture. The ecstatic, full-body worship seen in Pentecostal Black churches, shouting, falling to the ground in prostration, is seen by some scholars as echoing the physical sujud prostration of Islamic prayer, a practice that was completely foreign to the stiff, austere worship of the white, Anglican slave owners. Burial rites. Many slave communities insisted on burying their dead facing east, towards their African homeland, but also, coincidentally or not, towards Mecca. We also have extraordinary stories of retention. In 1803, a group of enslaved Igbos who may have been Muslim were marched onto St. Simon's Island, Georgia. They walked together into the water and drowned themselves, an act of mass suicide. This site is now known as Igbo Landing, a story of resistance. Even more striking is the story of Bilali Muhammad, an enslaved man on Sapelo Island, Georgia, in the early 19th century. Bilali was a literate Fula Muslim. He openly practiced his faith, served as the leader of a community of 80 other Muslims on his plantation, and was buried, at his request, with his prayer mat and his copy of the Quran. His descendants, even into the 20th century, retained traces of his faith, using Islamic-sounding words they no longer knew the meaning of. The Great Erasure. Why was this history forgotten? If this history is so rich, and the evidence is so clear, why don't we know about it? Why is it not a standard part of American history textbooks? Reason 1. It was actively suppressed. The pro-slavery argument. The pro-slavery argument, which formed the bedrock of the Confederacy, depended entirely on a specific racist ideology, that the African was a godless, uncivilized, illiterate heathen who needed the blessing of slavery to be saved and civilized by white, Christian masters. An enslaved man like Omar ibn Said, who could read and write in Arabic, who was a sophisticated monotheistic scholar of a global religion before he was captured, completely destroyed this entire justification. He was living proof that the savage was, in many cases, more educated than the master. Therefore, this history had to be erased, ignored, or Christianized by celebrating Omar's conversion while ignoring the deep Islamic roots he never lost. Reason 2, it didn't fit the dominant American narratives. This history complicates everyone's story. For the traditional Judeo-Christian nation narrative, it introduces a powerful, foundational Islamic element right at the beginning, making the American religious story far messier and more pluralistic from day one. For the Black church narrative, the dominant, powerful, and true story of African American survival and liberation is the story of the Black church, which adopted the Christian Exodus narrative as its own. An earlier Islamic history complicates this, suggesting that for many, Christianity was not a first choice, but a replacement for a lost, original monotheistic faith. For the 20th century New Islamic narrative, when movements like the Nation of Islam or Orthodox Islam grew in the 20th century, they were framed as a rejection of Christianity, the slave religion, and a return to an original, lost African faith. This also contributed to the erasure, as it framed itself as a new beginning, rather than a continuation of a 17th century presence. This history was, in short, inconvenient for everyone, and so it was forgotten. Conclusion: the final debate: what does this history change? So, the historical fact is this: Islam is not a new religion in America. It is one of the oldest. It was here in the 17th century. It was practiced by hundreds of thousands of the nation's earliest, albeit unfree, inhabitants. And this history was actively suppressed and erased. This leads us to a profound and deeply challenging debate about American identity. Does this forgotten history fundamentally challenge the popular narrative of America as a nation founded on purely Judeo-Christian principles? Does the presence of hundreds of thousands of enslaved Muslims change the religious texture of the nation's founding? And furthermore, how does this knowledge reframe our understanding of the African American religious experience? Is the story of the Black church the story of adopting the Exodus narrative as a path to liberation, the whole story? Or must we now also see it as a story of survival built upon the erasure of another great world faith? Does this mean that for many, Christianity was not an adoption, but an imposition that replaced a lost Islamic heritage? What does it mean for American history? If America's first Muslims were its slaves? Let me know your thoughts, respectfully, in the comments below. If you found this deep dive into a lost chapter of American history fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe for more content that uncovers the hidden stories that shaped our world. Thanks for watching.